In the early 19th century, surviving a shipwreck on the open ocean often meant you were only halfway to safety. The real danger began when you actually saw land. The coast of Cornwall, in southwestern Britain, is lined with sheer cliffs and submerged reefs. It was a notoriously brutal stretch of water for merchant ships to navigate. When a winter storm pushed a vessel toward these rocks, the local townsfolk would gather on the cliffs, but the surf was far too violent to launch a wooden lifeboat, and the distressed ships were usually 50 to 100 yards out, impossible distances for anyone to throw a rescue rope by hand. The sailors were close enough to hear the crowds on the shore shouting, but without a way to physically bridge that gap, proximity to land during a gale meant almost certain death. On December 29, 1807, a Royal Navy frigate called the HMS Anson struck a sandbank near Helston and shattered against the cliff face. Among the crowds on the shore was a 35-year-old local cabinet maker named Henry Trengrouse. He stood in the freezing rain and watched helplessly as over 100 men drowned in the breakers, sometimes within 30 yards of where he stood. Watching those sailors slip under the water forced Trengrouse to reevaluate the entire mechanics of maritime rescue. If the waves would instantly crush any boat sent out, the only logical path to the ship was through the air. He left the beach that afternoon consumed by a single obsessive engineering problem. He had to invent a way to shoot a lifeline directly over the surf. Trengrouse's solution bypassed human arm strength entirely. By launching a rocket from the cliff edge, he propelled a lightweight cord hundreds of yards over a stranded ship's rigging. The crew then hauled a thicker, load-bearing rope across the water, anchoring it securely to the mast. With the heavy line suspended above the waves, Trengrouse deployed a breeches buoy, a pulley-driven harness featuring a life ring and canvas shorts, to ferry exhausted sailors safely to the cliff edge, one by one. Through repeated trials on the rugged coastline, Trengrouse proved the physics worked. He had engineered a reliable, field-tested system that completely solved the shoreline gap. But solving the physics of the ocean was straightforward compared to moving the British administrative state. To get his apparatus deployed on ships and coastal stations, Trengrouse had to convince the authorities in London. This required repeated, exhausting 4-day coach journeys from Cornwall to the capital, often traveling through deep winter snowstorms, only to be met with closed doors and polite dismissals from successive governments. Developing the prototypes and funding his own lobbying trips quickly drained his personal savings, along with a £500 inheritance. When that money ran out, he took legal action to cut the entail on his family's ancestral estate, Prisk, and sold the property entirely to keep the project alive. Even international validation couldn't save his finances. The Russian Tsar sent him a diamond ring in recognition of the device's success on the Baltic Sea. But Trengrouse was soon forced to pawn it to buy more time. The government establishment continually ignored his field data, bleeding his wealth dry until he had nothing left to give. Finally, in 1821, the Society of Arts reviewed his apparatus. They awarded him a silver medal and a grant of 30 guineas. That 30 guineas stood against the £3,000 he had spent out of pocket, the loss of his family's land, and 14 years of his own health. He died at age 82, completely impoverished. The British government never mandated his device during his lifetime. His singular obsession to bridge the gap between ship and shore resulted in his absolute ruin, with no official vindication to show for it. But after his death, the British government quietly reversed its stance and formally adopted the rocket apparatus. Trengrouse's exact blueprint became the foundational standard. Coast guards and maritime agencies around the world implemented the rocket line and breeches buoy exactly as he had designed them. Over the next century, that specific mechanism pulled tens of thousands of doomed sailors out of the freezing surf. Henry Trengrouse died without a penny to his name. His story proves that true innovation requires a brutal, solitary sacrifice, fueled by an empathy so strong it demands everything you have.